January 17, 1945. The Western Pacific, dawn. The sky above the USS Essex was the color of steel, gray, cold, and infinite. A young kamikaze pilot named Nakamura Isamu sat cramped in the cockpit of his Mitsubishi A6M0, hands trembling against the controls. Below him, the American fleet spread across the ocean like a constellation of iron stars. Each vessel known emerged from the desperate mathematics of late 1944. Japan was losing the war. American industrial capacity had transformed the Pacific into an assembly line of carriers, battleships, and aircraft that no amount of traditional tactics could counter. Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, commander of the 1st Air Fleet in the Philippines, calculated that conventional attacks achieved a hit rate of. The system worked like this. Radar pulses transmitted from a dish antenna would bounce off an incoming aircraft and return to the receiver. The time delay between transmission and reception gave the range. The angle of the antenna gave the bearing and elevation. But knowing where an aircraft was did not solve the fundamental problem of gunnery, hitting where it would be. Some pilots believed the Americans had developed a new type of ammunition that could think. Others believed that American gunners possessed supernatural abilities, that they could see the future. A few, more technically minded, suspected radio-controlled shells, a technology that did exist in experimental form but was not widely deployed. The truth, that mathematics and electromagnetic waves were PR. The numbers tell the story that words cannot fully convey. During the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, before radar-directed fire became standard across the fleet, kamikaze attacks achieved a hit rate of approximately 14%. 1 in 7 aircraft struck their targets, devastating when one considers that a single hit could cripple or sink a destroyer to 30 feet, creating a sphere of shrapnel that did not require a direct hit to destroy an aircraft. Prior to the VT fuse, anti-aircraft shells used time-delay fuses. Gunners would estimate the altitude of the target, set the fuse to detonate at that altitude, and hope the shell and the aircraft occupied the same space at the same moment. It was, fundamentally, guesswork elevated to a science. They stopped sleeping, he wrote. They would lie on their cots staring at the ceiling, or sit outside smoking cigarettes until dawn. Some wrote letters to their families every night, the same letter, over and over, as if the repetition could lock in the sincerity before death erased it. Others became recklessly cheerful, joking and laughing with a brittle intensity that fooled no one. A few simply W. each other, their explosions triggering fuel and ammunition fires that killed nearly 400 sailors and took 3 hours to control. The ship survived, but barely. This was the paradox of the kamikaze strategy in its final months. The American defensive systems were statistically overwhelming, 98% effective, but 2% of 4,000 pilots is still 80 aircraft. It taught them that Americans had rendered spiritual strength irrelevant, that the United States did not need courage when it had radar, did not need warriors when it had systems, did not need sacrifice when it had production capacity. One kamikaze pilot, interviewed in the 1970s, said that what terrified him most was not the moment of impact, which he had been prepared to accept, but the second. And the faster the aircraft dove, the less maneuverable it became, the more predictable its trajectory. Physics became another ally of the American gunners. There was no solution. Every tactical adjustment met a technological counter. The kamikazes were medieval knights charging machine gun nests, samurai attacking battleships, courage confronting calculus. And the final mass kamikaze attacks occurred on August 13, 1945, 2 days before the Emperor's surrender broadcast. By this point, the Japanese military was fully aware that the war was ending. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had occurred. The Soviet Union had entered the war. The strategic situation was not merely hopeless, it was finished. Yet the attacks continued, driven by a moment. In the years after the war, the survivors of the Kamikaze Corps, those grounded by weather, mechanical failure, or the simple mathematics of too many volunteers and too few aircraft, struggled to articulate what they had experienced. Japanese society did not want to hear about their terror. The narrative demanded heroism, sacrifice, nobility. The idea that kamikaze pilots had been terrified, that technology with precision, with the integration of electronics and mechanics. They built Sony and Honda, Toshiba and Panasonic. They took the lesson they had learned in the most terrible classroom imaginable, that advanced technology married to industrial capacity creates overwhelming power, and they applied it not to weapons, but to transistors and motorcycles and televisions. It is perhaps